To another one of the ASM Roundtables. Today we're going to be talking about the automotive industry. I was at CES earlier this year, and the automotive industry was really making a lot of impact, particularly driverless vehicles. Audi and Mercedes had bought driverless vehicles all the way up from Silicon Valley to Las Vegas successfully on the roads without hitting anything. So it was a big play there, but also we're seeing a lot of developments in terms of infotainment and our connected world being taken into the car. So stuff that we're using on our smartphone, we want to use in our car. So lots going on there. Collision between the supply chain of the automotive world, which is normally conservative, and the supply chain of the consumer electronics world, which is much faster moving. I want to bring up three guests to talk about this. First of all, Mark Northrup. Mark is from IEC Electronics, a contract manufacturer. Mark also has a huge amount of experience in the automotive sector with various different OEMs. Next, I want to bring up Jeff Timms. Jeff is from the placement division of ASM Assembly Systems, and Brian Smith, who is from the print division. So we'll be able to comment on that side of it. What I want to explore, first of all, is really what are some of the trends that are driving automotive and making this change happen? If I can start with you, Mark, from your experience, obviously driverless is one of the ones that we're getting a lot of buzz about, but what's really being manufactured and what's impacting on you as a contract manufacturer?
From a driver point of view, I'd say the first thing is the smartphones that you're carrying in your pocket right now. What's driving the same technology into the cars today? The user interface, for example, you guys want touch screens. Two is as far as what you can do with your phone yourself relative to what's already loaded into it. That translates into my world. From the electronic side is I have a distributed set of electronics within the body of the car now. Days of old, you had a centralized CPU into it. And now if I asked you how many CPUs in the car today, there's probably 30 to 60 of them underneath the hood of the car, as well as in the body of the car. And in my manufacturing world, that makes it even more interesting because all this equipment that we have to use to place this on boards, the density of those boards become more complex, requires me to have better equipment to do that with. But keeping that simple, when I want to say infotainment and watch my kids watch TV in the back seat while I'm navigating with my GPS on the car screen, those are things I consider electronic toys, which I enjoy. I like that. So.
Okay, so let's drive it out. Jeff, you're out with working with various different OEMs in the automotive world. What are they talking to you about in terms of their roadmap, in terms of looking forward?
Yeah, Phil, I think one of the most significant areas is becoming accident collision avoidance, right?
Okay.
Collision management. It's not just collision management anymore; it's collision avoidance, and really taking over the guesswork from the driver, taking that danger zone out of the hands of the driver. So if you look at that in combination with all the sensor technologies that are required to do that, we're seeing that section of the business just exploding right now.
Yeah.
So the infotainment piece is huge, but also the legislated safety features that are finding their way into the vehicles. It's driving a lot of manufacturing.
Yeah, and I certainly like the idea of my collisions being avoided rather than managed. That sounds much more attractive to me.
No question.
What about you, Brian? What are you seeing with the customers you're speaking to?
Yeah, it's the same sort of thing that these guys mentioned. I think we're right on track here. I mean, you mentioned CES right at the top of this conversation, and I went to CES 2014, and it was incredible that it's become a car show.
Yeah.
There are automotive companies there showing entire cars, not just modules and this and that, but the safety features that are putting into the car, the efforts to make the car more autonomous are really unbelievable. And people talk about driverless cars because that's the interesting thing. The idea of just sitting there while the car's driving itself sounds cool, but there's little steps you have to make on the way to get there. Like they show now the way you can park the car, parallel parking, without you having to actually do the work.
Yeah.
And that's one of the baby steps on the way. And these little things are going to start taking over, and we're still several years away from having a realistic, autonomously driven car, but we're getting there, and that's really neat stuff.
Yeah, and I think what they were talking about, and I think a term that we're hearing used for that is assisted driving, the idea of lane control, the idea of collision avoidance, the idea of parking. I think it was Audi that were showing a demonstration where you could actually park your car with your finger on your iPhone, which is a pretty cool thing to be able to do. And the car's more reliable than the human being in terms of it knows where the vehicles are adjacent are. You can put your car in a space and not even need to open the door to get out. So that's pretty cool. What kind of growth potential do you think there is in the sector? I think I read somewhere we're about $2,800 of electronics in a car at the moment. People are talking about figures of up to $4,000 for that. Do you think that's realistic, Mark?
Absolutely, I think that's realistic. I was in a presentation yesterday, and the numbers you're quoting are pretty spot on. I think that the biggest reason why is if you look at the computer today and what you get for technology on it versus yesterday, it's far more sophisticated. Identically to the car, the features that we're all talking about, whether I want it safer because it can drive itself, whether I want it to be more sophisticated in terms of whether or not it can see in different types of weather relative to infrared sensors. Sensors are a big thing now that's adding additional value add to the car. And when you put this all together, what you're paying for the price of the car in terms of the mechanical versus the mecha electronics on it, the electronics is the margin that, we're, as consumers, we want that and we're going to pay for it.
Yeah. And Jeff, from your point of view, that growth, where are you seeing that growth geographically? Is it just in the traditional car manufacturing areas like Germany and Chicago?
I think you're seeing huge growth, huge expansion in Canada, huge expansion in Mexico. I think with the exchange rates as they are, and the legacy installed base, legacy manufacturing base in these areas, first growth will be those two places.
Yeah.
Certainly, additional growth in the in U.S. And I think by the end of the year, you're going to start to see some very significant growth in Brazil.
Okay. And from your point of view, Brian, why do you think countries like Mexico are suddenly becoming more significant? I know we talked about Mexico yesterday, but it seems to be doing particularly well in the automotive sector.
Yeah, of course. I mean, if you think about the electronics market on the whole, I would say that the 3 C's, the consumer, the computer, and the communication devices tend to more often come from Asia, but automotive tends to be the highest volume type of project that we see in the Americas. And from a low-cost standpoint, from a supply chain standpoint, one of the best places in the world to produce those sorts of products is in Mexico.
Yeah.
And so we see nothing really stopping the growth in the Mexican market to build car parts. That's really the biggest growth area for us.
Yeah.
I think also a very significant point that cannot be ignored is the liability aspect of automotive electronics, right? And the trust from a liability management standpoint, the trust has to be there with your supplier. And it's a lot better if you're in the same time zone or similar time zone. So your engineers can talk to engineers real time. You're not up in the middle of the night trying to talk to somebody that might be speaking a third language or a second language. And I think it makes a big difference on the geographical placement of those contracts.
Yeah, and perhaps there isn't quite the price-driven demands that there are in other sectors. Mark, when you look at those sectors and you look at the collision between manufacturing consumer goods, which has a very specific style of volume manufacturing, and you look at manufacturing automotive parts where you've got high reliability issues, now you see those worlds collide. What does that challenge you in terms of how you manufacture those products?
The answer to that, I would just start out the gate, talk about coatings. In our world, if you looked at commercial electronics, the adverse environment, harsh environment they're being placed in isn't as adverse. I go over to automotive now, and as a manufacturer of electronics that go into them, you as a user don't want to be able not to get into your car with a keyless entry because a solenoid won't unlock because the electronics don't function. Okay, so from a sophistication level, we all want it, but from a improved reliability performance, because of what I'm explaining in terms of the environment, it's forcing the commercial electronics to be put down as well as protected so that they will perform in these environments much longer. And it's very difficult because, again, putting the parts down is easy, but when you got to code them and do other things to it to make them more protective, that adds another layer of complexity to what we have to do from a manufacturing point of view.
Okay. Brian, when you're looking at it from a print point of view, what are the automotive manufacturers demanding from you? Is it miniaturization and the kind of heterogeneous, the normal stuff we see, or are there additional demands because of the environments they're in?
Yeah, there's a few extra things. I mean, I think the miniaturization and heterogeneous assembly factors are in automotive for sure, so we do see a lot of those concerns. Also in automotive, though, there's a lot of fail-safe built into the process. The engineers, they want to be able to walk away from the line and know that the operators can't make changes. They don't have to, everything in the automotive world, if you make a process change, you have to document it and get it approved by your customer. And that forces enough I guess, concern about engineers wanting to sleep well at night, that they want fail-safes put into the process so things can't be changed, so they're documented, and those sorts of things are important to build into the entire process.
Yeah, so the challenge then is you've got a robust process that's hard to change, but you still need to be flexible and fast-moving. How do you deal with that, Jeff?
So it certainly places a great deal of pressure on the equipment suppliers to provide real true traceability data, real-time, but not just traceability data, but as we were saying before, we were talking about collision avoidance. It's also problem avoidance, right? So all of a sudden, we're starting to see an increasing interest in electrical component testing and things like this. All coming back into the world of being online parts of the process. So you can't take a chance to have the wrong component ever on a circuit, right? Not only is it the world's harshest environment in an automobile, but if you consider the complexity involved in this thing that we call a car, that's really a cradle of connectivity, it's remarkable that we have the reliabilities that we do.
Yeah. So it's very, very demanding.
I'd like to add one more comment as well. Is don't also think on top of the board, the technologies in your phones is also in the board.
That's right.
So that brings a whole new dimension of this, because now I've got to put embedded electronics into a circuit board for both power management, for reduction of spatial, as well as for efficiency increase in terms of throughput. That's a whole new dimension from a manufacturing world, because if I build the board, I don't fabricate the board. Am I going to receive that as a part? And then I'm going to have to work with the people that would give me the equipment that helps assemble it, how to address that and test it. So just one more variable that it adds to us that we have to be challenged by.
Yeah. And as well as changes in the automotive industry, we're starting to see some changes in some of the business models. We're starting to see not just the automotive OEMs working in this sector. We're starting to see more of, particularly the large contract manufacturers, having their own automotive divisions. From your point of view, Mark, is this an additional opportunity? Is this somewhere where you can bring together skills from two sectors to really bridge the gap between those industries?
Absolutely. Another example of that is if we broke it out into traditional medical versus automotive versus industrial versus the Internet of Things of today. The IoT market right now is approximately 1 trillion plus forecasted right now. If I look at it in terms of the automotive, it's about 500 billion. And when I start connecting the medical aspect to it, when you're in your car and I ask you the question, do you want to know what the wearables like I'm wearing today can get you that same information while you're in the car? As an example, if you were going to fall asleep in your car, obviously if it wasn't unmanned, you'd like to know that before it occurred. So connecting those three market segments together, I just took 500 billion, increased it to 2.5 trillion.
Yeah.
So for me, that's insurmountable. You just can't refuse to look at that. If I just looked at aerospace, which is getting smaller, again, I just crossed three of them and tied them together because of the connection that we just did with the Internet of Things.
Yeah, and I think that's important. We're seeing a complete blurring of the lines between industries. And you talk about something that is a sensor in a seatbelt. Is that a wearable? Is that a medical device? Is that an automotive device? A consumer device? The answer is it's probably all of them. Last question I'd like to ask each of you is, given all this explosion in things that you can have operating electronically in your car, what would be your first choice? For me, I like the idea of piloted vehicles in traffic. That traffic management thing where I just hate driving in traffic. I want to be able to switch over, have lane control, stay the right distance behind the car in front. Mark, what would you choose?
I'm a gamer, so anything I can have to enhance the game experience while I'm in that car, whether it says Xbox, whether it says PS, or whether it says something else, I'm all for it.
You want to play Call of Duty while you're driving?
I do, but probably my wife doesn't.
Jeff?
Yeah, I think, Phil, if I fast forward this industry 10 or 15 years, it will be a reality that driverless vehicles are a day-to-day occurrence in metropolitan areas. Yeah. Maybe I'm not so fond of having a computer drive my car down the highway when I might want to go 100 miles an hour, but by the time I come into a major metropolitan area like Atlanta or LA or someplace, I want somebody else to take control. So I do have that fixed distance, and and you eliminate stoplights and you eliminate stop signs and you just zipper through the traffic lanes. Yeah. That makes a whole lot of sense.
So driverless Uber is what we're looking for.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Brian?
Yeah, from my standpoint, I've got young kids, so I have a 10-year-old who's going to be going for his driver's license before I know it, and I want the car to be as safe as it can be, because I don't know that I want to put him out there in the world that we live in now. I'd rather him have a safer car. I mean, you just don't know with kids how they're going to turn out, and mine I think will be all right, but you know, we'll see when he's 16 if he can handle being behind the wheel of a
Put
car.
the game box in there.
We already have that in the back of the van.
Put the game box in there.
Right.
So isn't it strange how we don't want our children to take the risks we took, and we took much greater risks.
Exactly.
We had no
Exactly.
choice.
I didn't have a seatbelt growing up. Did you?
Seatbelt.
What's that?
Guys, thanks very much for your time. Really interesting
you.
conversation. I think it's going to be really exciting to see how this sector develops. Thanks very much for
Thank
joining me up here, and
Thank
thanks
you, Phil.
everybody for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil.